I'm going to talk a little bit about power and how power sort of figures into the mix, and then we'll shift more toward the boundaries discussion. So I'm going to suggest to you that increased power brings distortions to how we see ourselves, and it increases the potential damage in the event of an escape. You know, we talked about this protecting the outside from what's inside. So, you know, the distortions that can bring sort of heightens the need for you to have effective internal self-controls and some good external controls as well. So let's talk about power. So power is your capacity to make a difference, to affect the world around you. It comes from a variety of sources. It may come from your size. You know, if I'm an adult and I'm interacting with a 2-year-old, I'm more powerful simply because of my size. Your strength, it may come from your position in an organization. It may come from your stature in society. It may come from your wealth, right? Resources gives you some meaningful power. I think sometimes for people in ministry, they might say, I don't have much money. I'm not too high in the hierarchy here. I don't really have much power. But, you know, it may come from some other things like your persuasive abilities. You know, those of you who are in ministry, you know, if you're a youth pastor, if you're a lead pastor, you're up in front of people and people are listening to your advice every week and they think you have it together. Maybe more, maybe more, maybe less than you do. But you know, part of your job is to sort of be a healthy role model for people. To help them lead healthy, Christ-honoring lives, and so being someone who speaks from the stage does bring you a certain degree of power. You do have more power than you may realize. I'm going to suggest also that your power generally grows as you advance in your career. It's not always the case, but it does generally grow as you advance in your career. Most people in their careers, they advance in positions within the company. They build relationships with, well, they get paid more. They build relationships with other people who are sort of rising up in power in organizations. You know, even as if you're the leader of a ministry, you know, part of your job may be to identify and inspire some people who have a lot of wealth and some people who are kind of important people, all right? And so you have some power with those folks as well. And I just sort of throw this little extra tidbit in here. Underestimating your power can lead to unhealthy risk aversion. Sometimes people just step back from things they ought to embrace because they don't think they have power that they may actually have. Good leaders sometimes have to wield their power in ways that cause pain to other people, right? Even if you're a church, you may have to terminate underperforming employees because that's what helps the church to function more effectively, right? A really interesting read is a book called The Power Paradox by Dacher Keltner. And I'll share a little bit about what's in that book. But he presents evidence. I want to say he's out of Stanford, but he presents evidence that groups generally give power to nice people who look out for other people's needs. All right? People are usually seen as leaders, and they're regarded as leaders in large part because they look out for other people. All right? That's how you get there. All right? But power is very seductive, and it reliably corrupts. It reliably corrupts. This is a very replicable, it's a very broad phenomena. As people grow in power, some bad things start happening inside of them, all right? So, you know, I already told you about the guy with the pond. I mean, you see some things were kind of going in a not so good direction here. Is there anyone in here who's like a Get Smart fan? This was a show that was like popular in the 60s. Okay. So I love Maxwell Smart. But he had this line that he says, give a guy an inch and he thinks he's a ruler. Okay. And it just illustrates this concept really well. But Power is seductive. And what we see as people grow in their power, they start losing their capacity for empathy, all right? And they start losing their capacity for moral sentiment, all right? Their sense of right and wrong starts getting flimsier, all right? Again, this is a very reliable phenomena. It happens to people who work in churches, and it happens with Christian business leaders just like it happens with everybody else. As your power grows, we all tend to drift toward more self-serving impulsivity, all right? We will do things without thinking that meet our own needs more than we would have before our power had grown. It leads to more incivility. It leads to more disrespect. You grow in power, you're more likely to disrespect people who you might view as less or lower than yourself. It leads to a sense of personal exceptionalism. The rules don't really apply to me, okay? And, this is one of these things that we can kind of look at and say, oh, that wouldn't happen to me. This is very replicable. This happens with, so you have to be on guard. You have to be on guard about it. So I want to talk a little bit about just managing your own power. And again, I'm going to suggest to you that you do, that book's just a really interesting read, The Power Paradox. The book that I wrote with David Ashcraft, we address this in a little more depth as well. But a couple things that I want to highlight about this. One thing in managing your own power is you just have to guard against self-centeredness and pride. It's interesting. 1 Corinthians 4:7, in talking about gifts, says, what do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? And it's very easy. So I'll say this. I talked earlier about, if you're a pastor or a leader, look, realistically, you're better at a lot of things than a lot of the people around you, okay? You become a leader in an organization because you're really good at a lot of things, and you're probably better than most of the other people in your organization at certain tasks, all right? If you're a pastor, you're probably better at most people in communicating and inspiring, okay? You're better at a lot of things maybe than the average person or the people who are around you, all right? It's just a reality of that. The problem comes when we confuse being better at with being better than, all right? And so, God's gifted you with certain things, and there's a different mix of gifts, and people look up to you. But being better at certain things doesn't mean you are better than anyone else as a human being. And it's very easy to slip into that trap. And so, and I want to be careful about how I say this. I just give examples about this, but, I'll see a lot of business leaders who, as their business gets successful, they like hobnobbing with other people who have a lot of money, okay? And that's okay. But there can almost sort of be this sense that if you're not part of the club, there's something less about you, all right? You'll see that happen in church communities, and even sometimes as a church grows, you're sort of in this different caliber of church categories, and you can start thinking a little differently about yourself, and this just creeps in. And so I'm just saying this is something we have to guard against. Better at does not mean better than, and realistically, if you're a leader, you're probably better at a lot of things than many of the people around you. That's why you're the leader, all right? That doesn't mean you're better than. Another thing is like, don't believe your own hype. You're not that special. Okay? So, all right, so, and I got, you're going to think I'm the worst parent in the world, but someone asked my son recently, what's the most important lesson you learned from your parents? He said, they told me I'm not special. And so, but we're like, you're special to us, but you're really not special, okay? And so look, I had an advisor early in my training. He said, you're going to have patients who just think you're the best person in life, and they're going to say all these wonderful things. And then you're going to have some people that just leave you feeling like you're worth nothing. And he said, you're not as good as the people who think you're awesome. You're not that good. And he said, and don't worry, you're not as bad as the people who can't stand you. And so, there's this don't believe your own hype, all right? Don't believe your own hype. We talked about this idea of having a prophet in your life. It's foster relationships with loving critics. The more successful you are as a leader, the more you need to ask others to question you and respectfully call you out, all right? You should invite accountability checks on your power from your board, from your colleagues. A lot of times leaders focus on the privileges of leadership rather than the responsibilities of leadership. And as you gain power, there is more risk that you will derail. And it's that much more important that you offer more accountability for yourself. So I'll just give you an example. I'm consulting with a board where the board was willing to give the executive director of this organization a fair amount of latitude over the finances. And she said, stop. She said, I want other people's eyes on this money. All right? She said, I want it. I want other people's eyes on this money. All right? My wife can locate wherever I am at any time. And I was one time in a store, and I bought something. She goes, "What are you doing in that store?" Okay, now look. And she was just joking with. She's just joking with me. She saw the receipt came through the credit card company. But look, so I'm not advocating. Couples ought to be stalkers of one another, and there certainly are situations where it's just really unhealthy if you do that. But there are lots of things we can do to just offer accountability that help us to prevent derailments. So I'm going to give you a couple other ideas just on how to manage your power, keep it at bay. So one thing is just spend some time with people who are outside your usual circle. Particularly if you're a leader, be in a situation where you're a nobody, all right? And expose yourself to those situations from time to time. I'm going to say also spend time with some unimportant people and try to relate to them on a peer level, not as an advice giver, okay? But you don't have to be around important people all the time. Spend time with people who are different than you and don't act like you got it together more than they do. Look at how you treat your most important constituent and apply that to your underlings. So maybe for a business person, this is your best client, your most important client. Maybe if you're a pastor, it's someone who gives a lot of money in your church, all right? But look at how you treat your most important constituent and ask yourself, am I willing to treat my underlings that way? And maybe you need to make some adjustments if you're not. Try to step in other people's shoes from time to time. What would it be like for me to be in this person's shoes? I've already talked about this idea. When you think of yourself as a leader, focus on the responsibilities of leadership, not the privileges of leadership, okay? If you've got I know I'm stuck on this pond because I love to fish, but, if you got a pond at your church, there's lots of fish there for people. Don't take it all yourself. But, and again, one of the things we did when I was on staff at LCBC, I don't even know if this software still exists. They had something called XXX Church software or something like that. And so it was a way you'd have an accountability partner and your computer would be screened for any things that might be a little bit, it was like mainly pornography type of things. And so you had an accountability partner, and if there was something questionable, it would sort of flag your accountability partner. So what are you looking at? So my friend said, "Hey, you've been looking at the Weather Channel quite a bit lately." And I'm like, okay. But anyway, so, invite accountability. Inviting accountability increases trust. When people have to ask for accountability, it tends to come from a place of mistrust. So building trust among the people you work with, offer it, don't wait to be asked. All right, so just some thoughts on power. I do want to shift then into managing boundaries, if that's okay for us to do now. So here we're talking about, as I said, manage what's outside that may create problems if it gets in, or at least if too much of it gets in. So the idea here is you have to know what's out there, and you have to know the danger that's posed by incursions. And whereas before, when we were talking about derailments, kind of the main theme is focus on containment. Here, the main theme is focus on defense. All right. So, so if you're trying to keep bugs out of your house, you use screens, you use caulk, you use pesticide. If you're trying to keep burglars out of your house, you use locks and alarms and cameras. And, part of the trick with this is look at what are the things that tend to intrude. And you're going to have different strategies depending on what the intruder looks like. And of course, knowing what's on the inside, managing what's inside so that it doesn't escape, that helps us set boundaries to the outside as well, because, there's a sense of because of what's in me, I have to be careful to keep that out. Okay, makes sense? So, an example of that, because of what, if you have sexual temptation in you, you may have to set certain boundaries to keep those temptations at bay. All right? Because of what's in me, I have to be firm about the fence I build or the boundary I build to keep it out. Make sense? Apologize if I'm doing too much double speak here inside and outside, doesn't that? So some of the boundaries we may choose to set are more like guide rails. They keep the bad stuff that's in me from getting out and doing damage. You might decide not to dine alone with someone of the opposite sex, for example, or you might choose to be shielded from knowing how much each person in your congregation donates to your ministry. I'm not saying you have to do those things. I'm just giving you examples of things you might choose to do. But for practical purposes, what I want to do is I want to shift our discussion to this idea of boundaries and dealing with the things on the outside that may create problems if they get in, going on defense, guarding against incursions. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about the book that I authored with David Ashcraft. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but for maybe the 3 or 4 people in the room who read that book, I just at least want to draw a connection for you. So the impetus for this book, David Ashcraft, he's retired now, pastor of LCBC Church, was mentored by a well-known, internationally known pastor. And part of the impetus for the book was that pastor had a pretty significant public fall. Okay, he had engaged in some sexual behavior. This guy was 6 months from retiring, and it just destroyed his ministry. Okay, so he would have gone, if it's 6 months later, he would have gone out in this wild celebration. That was not how he went out. Okay, and David was really close to this guy and was troubled by this. So, and I was like, well, let's have lunch. Let's talk about this. And so that sort of was the impetus for our book here. And, really what we were looking at in the book was kind of 2 things. It was about how people manage risk when they make decisions. And, part of it is this idea that, the best leaders, they're willing to take some risks. They don't play it too safe. You kind of have to take some risks to experience God's best for you. I mean, and when you think about the parable of the talents, it's kind of along those themes, Don't play it safe. If you play it too safe, you're likely to miss out on God's best. But, what happens when we get to this point where these people who seem to have a lot going do something that just seems like ridiculously foolish, and they throw it all away? So that's what's really behind the book. And so what we did in here was we developed something that we called the DOPE model of risk initiative. And I just kind of want to draw the distinction here. And so the idea behind the DOPE model is this, that anytime you're faced with a decision, you're faced with these 4 propositions of risk, and you really can't avoid them. They enter every any decision you make, this comes into play. The 4 propositions deal with desire, opportunity, power, and expectations. That's the DOPE model. But desire is really about what would you like, okay? The opportunity proposition is what's available. The power proposition is, can you make it happen? And the expectations proposition is what might result, all right? And this may seem like, I make decisions really readily. This stuff doesn't come into play. This comes into play in every decision you make. Sometimes it just happens more automatically than other times. So let me give you a couple examples of how this works. So, Harvey Weinstein, right? He was a movie producer and, a top movie producer. And then a few years ago, it comes out that he was sleeping with actresses. He'd call them up to his hotel room and offer them roles or not if they would sleep with him. And so I don't know all the details, but that's the gist of it. But you might look at, well, what's going through how's Harvey Weinstein approaching these decisions? So the desire is pretty simple there. Desire sexual gratification. All right? The opportunity, what's available? Well, here I am. I'm a powerful person. I have the keys to this person's career, and they're coming up to my room. And if they get this movie role, it's going to launch their career. I have an opportunity to be here with this person alone in my hotel room. Power, can you make it happen? Yeah, I can. Expectations, what might result? Well, he's probably thinking like, well, what will result is I'll get some sexual gratification. This person will get their role in the movies. They'll be rich. I'll be satisfied. We'll both do okay. Okay. You know, I don't read his mind, but I might imagine that's kind of how that plays out. Okay, so you might say, well, okay, that was a pretty complicated thing, but let's make it simpler. I have a young grandson, all right, and we play basketball in our driveway, and I'm gonna argue that the dope model applies to my grandson, even when he was 2 years old. Okay, so my driveway slopes down a little bit. So when we're playing basketball, let's suppose that ball starts rolling into the street, all right? And let's look at the decision a 2-year-old is faced with. Desire, pretty simple, ball, all right? Opportunity, I can chase the ball or not chase the ball, all right? Power, can you make it happen? Yeah, been walking for 6 months now. I can chase the ball. Okay. Expectations, what might result? If I chase the ball, I'll get the ball. All right, it's pretty simple, but that is a process. It happens very quickly, automatically, even in a simple decision like that. I'm in that same situation, and my dope model's a little differently. My desire playing basketball with my grandson is kind of, well, I want to have fun. I want to be safe. You know, I want to build relationship. That's all part of what I desire there. The opportunity, when that ball goes into the street, my view is a little more nuanced. You know, ball rolled into the street. I can let him run into the street and get it. I can go chase it myself when he's in the driveway. He might follow me. I can pick him up and then we walk to it. But by that time, it's going to be all the way down to the storm drain. And it's a longer walk. So, you know, I might look at the opportunities. I'm doing this pretty quickly. You do this quickly in those situations. Can you make it happen? Any of those? Yes, I can make it happen. But what might result? I mean, it's pretty quick. If I run there and he runs into the street, something bad's going to happen. If I let him get it, something bad's going to happen. So I'm operating out of this expectation that secure him and everything will be okay, and then we'll get the ball. But so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but. And then when you see with these other and self-interest, part of what we argue in the book is that we're more likely to make wise decisions when we focus more on others than on ourselves. Selfishness tends to bring about more derailer-like behavior than other things. So the book is really about navigating those 4 propositions, all right? And so when we're talking about derailers and such, we're mostly living in the desire, from a derailer standpoint, we're mostly focusing on the protecting against what's in me. So we're mostly looking at the desire, the power, and to some extent the expectations element. When we're focusing more on boundaries, what's external, we're looking more at the what's available and what you choose to make available or the situations you find yourself in. So again, I won't spend more time on that, but if any of you were sort of like wondering if, you know, for the 2 or 3 of you may have read the book and you're wondering how's this all fit together, that's kind of the overlay. All right. So let's talk about these managing boundaries. And again, the idea here is what is outside that may create problems if it gets in, or at least if too much of it gets in. So for many leaders, poor boundaries around their calendars and fulfilling requests leaves them feeling depleted and more prone to foolish behavior. You're more likely to derail when you are bored, stressed, or fatigued. And many leaders, especially good-hearted leaders who care about other people, they let themselves get sucked dry by all of the demands on their life, and it leaves them depleted and less able to deal with potential derailers. You know, you think back to in Exodus 18, we see Moses' father-in-law challenging him. Moses was sitting there all day long judging the people, And his father-in-law, went to, take your father-in-law to work day. And he's he's like, this is not good. You're going to wear yourself out. You can't do this. And so he challenged them. And this was really a boundary thing. You can't do all of this yourself. Appoint other people to do some of this. Well, they're not going to do it as well as I do. So what? It's still going to get done better than it is now, and you're not going to wear yourself out in the process. Jesus separated himself from crowds who wanted him to be with them. He separated himself from crowds so that he could spend one-to-one time with God. There were still people standing there who had needs, who could have been healed. But you know what? He separated himself out. His mother and his brothers showed up. Family priorities. Mother and brothers showed up. He pretty much said, I'm working here. Your mother and brothers want to talk to you. And he said, no, these are my mother and brothers. I'm working here. He kept them at bay. We see biblical examples where setting boundaries can be a healthy thing. I told you a little bit about my family here, and one of the things that we did that some people think is kind of weird. I mentioned I have 3 kids. They're all adults now, and they're pretty close in age, so they kind of moved through life at similar phases. But when the oldest was in about 10th grade, we conducted a family budgeting exercise, okay? Because we were thinking like, okay, we're going to be putting these kids through college, but, it's not quite adding up here. And this sounds really goofy. We sat there with a PowerPoint at the dining room table with our kids, and we said, here's our income, here's our savings, here's our budget. And all 3 of our kids wanted to go to college. But again, and we wanted to send them, but the numbers weren't really adding up. So we looked together with them and we said, here's what we're going to have. Sorry about that. We looked together and we said, you got to help us decide where we're going to make some cuts if you want to go to college. Okay. We had to do some budgeting with that. And what I'm going to suggest is a key to setting proper boundaries is it's a lot like managing a budget when you have limited resources. Okay, really, you can't do it all. There's only 24 hours in a day. You can't do it all, and you have to make some difficult choices, not unlike managing a budget. So very simply stated, this is simple, but it's not easy. You have to determine what you want in each major area of your life. You have to order your priorities. You have to allocate your time, energy, and resources to each area. You have to be willing to sacrifice lesser priorities for greater ones, and you have to regularly monitor how you're doing and adjust accordingly. So let me hit a couple of these things. When I talk about each major area of your life, I'm talking about work, spiritually, financially, whatever. And I'll give you some other categorization there. Ordering your priorities may change a bit over time. If you're in a period at work where there's just a big project that's important that has to be done, you just may have to work longer hours at work for a period of time. And you have to adjust. That's part of your job. It's part of your responsibility. If anyone here knows a CPA or is a CPA or a recovering CPA, you kind of know that, they don't see much of their families this time of year because they're doing taxes. And that just goes with the territory, and they may make adjustments at other times. If you've ever been in a situation where you had a sick spouse seriously ill or a parent who was dying, you know that you shuffle the deck for a season. And that's just normal. That happens. Where work will intrude or where family will intrude in other areas. Some areas just require more attention for worthy reasons in certain seasons. I have a worksheet that I use. I'm not going to present it to you here. It's pretty self-explanatory. I gave it to Emily. She's going to distribute it with the slide decks to everybody, but it just kind of walks you through an exercise of how you can take a good look at what matters to you and use that to help order your time and keep the lesser important things at bay. But that resource will be available to you. I say allocate your time, energy, and resources to each area. There are very real, very tangible limits to time, energy, and resources. Right? There are so many hours in a day. You do need your sleep. You can't do it all. And you have to suck it up and realize you can't do it all. There are trade-offs. You have to be deliberate about what you're going to sacrifice for other things. I think it's important also just to regularly monitor how you're doing and adjust accordingly. And again, this may vary on what phase of life you're in. When my children were younger, I was serving on 2 different boards at the time, and I was still doing some clinical work, so I had some evening times where I was working. And so I was concerned that I wasn't given evening time with my kids when they were growing up. So it sounds really goofy, but I put a little chart in the back of my Bible, and I went there every Sunday, and I had certain things that I monitored. I wanted to be home at least 4 evenings a week. And so, each week I'm making sure I hit that. I wanted to make sure that I was having some alone time with my wife, at least, once or twice a month. And, so there are times where you just may have to watch this stuff pretty carefully. So I want to talk about a case study here. Anytime, well, aside from the people whose names I gave you earlier, who we all know about because they were in the news, anytime I'm talking about someone I worked with, I'm disguising it. I wouldn't call out someone that I work with here. But I want to talk with you about someone who I'll just call the go-getter. And this is a very busy executive who struggles to set boundaries at work. And so what was happening was he was devoting a lot of time to work, had 2 young children. He's married. His wife works also. He was in a high responsibility position, a C-level position with his organization. And he recognized that things were out of balance. But this guy was routinely working 70 plus hours a week. Okay? Now, in terms of how many hours a week a person can work, I'm going to say it can vary from one individual to the next. Some people can manage to work really long hours. Some people really can't. But I really haven't seen too many people who can work routinely 60 hours a week or more and then not do damage to some other element of their life. Okay? I mean, it just doesn't happen very often. I do know a few people who, they're single, they love their work, they might push it a little bit over that line. But if you're persistently working over 60 hours a week, you're probably creating some damage in relationships, maybe with your health, maybe in some other areas. So not a hard and fast rule, but an observation. This particular individual was still a reasonably young man. He had been, when I started working with him, he'd been hospitalized as a young man because of blood pressure issues. They had to stabilize his blood pressure. And as I say, he worked over 70 hours a week. And he was a go-getter, very well regarded in his organization. But as we were talking, and I was asking him, what about your family, that sort of thing. Well, one of the things I routinely do when I'm coaching people is I'll ask them about their values and what's important to you. And it's kind of a goofy exercise, but I'll say, let's fast forward the clock a little bit, and let's say you're 90-some years old, and you're lying on your deathbed, and you want to be able to look back and say, I had a life that's well lived. What do you want to be able to say? I have a life that's well lived. What do you want to be able to say for yourself? What do you want the people around you to say about you when you're on your deathbed? And so we look at, what kind of spouse do you want people to remember you as or say you were? What kind of father or mother? What kind of coworker? What about the people in your community? So we're trying to look out ahead about this. And then we sort of back it into, okay, well, let's look at how you're spending your time now. And maybe we should make some adjustments so that you actually can say those things and other people can say those things about you when you're 90, whatever. And so I did that with this guy. And so what we ended up doing with this was we identified some areas with him. And so he was routinely working over a 70-hour work week, and it was kind of what's realistic. And at first he said, I get it to 45. I said, no, you can't. And I think, for a while it was 60, and then we ratcheted it back a little bit more. But 50-hour work week. He said, I want to be remembered as a good father. I said, well, what's a good father look like? He said, quality time with their kids. And we were talking a little bit about, do you really have quality time if it's only this much? So there was, maybe there needs to be more quantity time. So what we navigated through is he said, I think I could devote maybe 5 blocks of time each week just to be with my kids. And I was like, well, when are those going to be? Schedule it. You're a schedule guy. Put it on your schedule. So he blocked that in. He said, I could pay more attention to my health. I need to exercise more. Okay, what's realistic? And, it was maybe 2 days a week, and he expanded that in time. Oh, and I do want to say, so what we were doing as we looked at what he valued and we were looking at what he said was important to him and what he wants to be able to say at the end of his life, we kind of backed it into what do you need to adjust now so that you get there? And again, this is a boundaries exercise. And so these were the things we came up with. And we monitor these. I've been working with this guy for years. We monitor this every time we meet. How you doing on these areas? And this is a constant battle for him. It's a moving target. It's always slipping. And so we're always adjusting. We've talked about his diet. So, he gets caught up at work and he's busy with things. He gets crappy food that he shouldn't be eating because it's the easiest thing to do. So we made some adjustments there. He wanted to make sure he was doing a date night at least twice a month, just alone time with his wife twice a month. Okay? One of the things that this guy struggled with was his organization had a board of directors, and there was a board member who would just call him and text him at all hours, all right? And he liked this guy, and it was kind of fun. He sort of enjoyed it, but it was interfering with his family time. So we said, what can you do about that? Well, at least like during meals, can you just is the world going to blow up if this guy can't get a hold of you? And I'll tell you, I see a lot of people who are in sales who just think if I don't pick up the call when a customer calls, it's a problem. And, no, set the right expectations. It's not as much of a problem as you think it's going to be. This guy spent a lot of time working on weekends. And, at his kids' games, this is my time to get some work done. But you know what? He missed the game. And so we said, what's realistic? Can you put the laptop away on weekends? No, I can't. What can you realistically limit it to? 2 hours. What about these after-hours texts? How important really are they? They're not that important. How many of these things are real emergencies? Can you, with the people who are likely to catch you in an emergency, can you ask them to call you if it's an emergency and let them know you're going to ignore texts and emails? Yeah, I can do that. This guy had some real estate interests as well, and this was, there's a few real estate, he was partners with other people in like real estate LLCs, and, wouldn't you know it, he's the managing partner in each of these businesses. He's the one responsible for it. So, okay, well, do you need to be the managing partner in each of these? All right, let's start moving that off to some of the other people. In his workplace, a lot of our work was, are there some things you need to delegate to other people? Well, other people can't do it well. Okay, how can we get them to a point where they can do it well? Well, they're not going to do it as well as I do it. I know. But at least they'll do it, and that will allow you to do the things that actually you're paid to do, which are higher level responsibilities, which sometimes you're neglecting or you're getting to and your family's paying a price. So let's figure out a way that you can develop other people to take on some of these duties. Okay? And a big piece of this also was, what have you said no to? Well, I got to know about this. Can you ask someone else on your team to go to that meeting? Do you really need to be there? Can you turn something down? Okay. So I'm just giving you an example, and this isn't like a once and done thing. I think most achievement-oriented people, if you're an achievement-oriented person, this is a constant battle. This is a constant battle, so you need to know it's a constant battle. It's always going to be shifting, but you do have to keep the end in mind if I want to be known as a good leader, a good coworker, a good husband or wife, a good dad or mom. You got to pay attention to stuff. It's not easy. And it's a constant balancing act. And you might have a friend that you meet with who can keep you on track with this. I have a guy I've been meeting with We meet once a month, and it's probably been for the past 10 to 12 years. And there was a book out a number of years ago. I think it was called, I don't know, The Man in the Mirror or something like that. I can't remember, but it was kind of going around to a lot of men's groups and everything. And they had this list of questions that you grill each other on. And so I meet with this guy once a month, and we're grilling each other on these questions. And some of them have to do with work, some of them have to do with family, some of them have to do with our thought life, and all kinds of stuff. And we push each other on that stuff. So you don't have to have an executive coach to do this kind of monitoring, but you probably do need to subject yourself to someone's input on how you're keeping balance. All right. So just an example there. All right. So here's what I want you to do from an exercise standpoint. I want you to consider, I just sort of popped out 7 areas here. And I'll leave this slide up for a moment here. And there might be some other realm in your life that's, I'm not claiming this is an exhaustive list, but there might be some other realm in your life that, that you have to sort of guard in some way. But you should consider work. Work's an important part of your life, a priority area. Think about marriage and family relationships. Think about intimacy with God. Think about health and personal well-being, finances, friends, and other key relationships. And leisure may make the list as well. But your list might look a little bit different than that. But what I'd like you to do is, you may have to jot that down. I don't have a handout for you. I should have thought of that. But what I want you to do is, like individually, I want you to rank those in order of most to least importance to you. And I know there's a little bit artificial. You might say, oh, these are equally important to me. But I want you to kind of put them in order. What's most important to you? When you're on your deathbed, which is the one that's most important that you say, I did well in this area? And then I want you to ask yourself, which area is the highest item on your list where you feel like you may be failing in some way? Where incursions or intrusions from people, circumstances, or another competing priority are creating some problems. And this is the area where I'm going to challenge you for today to develop stronger boundaries. Now, I want to be careful. I'm working with Christian people, and I have this item, intimacy with God, on the list. And, I know you're going to be at your tables, and you'll be thinking, like, I don't want that to look like not the most important thing to me. Okay. So I'm not trying to set you up here, and and I'm not saying, so I'm just going to operate under the assumption that for all of us, we'd say, put God first, all right? But what I'm talking about is sort of the activities of intimacy with God, which is time spent in prayer, time spent in study of Scripture. It's those types of things which we're not necessarily expecting to consume our full calendar. So I just want to challenge you, like, let's not have everyone say that's the number one thing on my list, all right? I get we all love God, and He's number one in our lives, but let's not put that first on the list. And I'm going to say, for some of you, it's going to be the same area that routinely makes incursions in the other areas. The example I gave you, this go-getter, it was always work pushing into the other areas. He didn't have to worry about whether he was working enough. His employer didn't have to worry about whether he was giving enough to the company. That just wasn't an issue with him. It was always work takes over everything else. And so he had to guard the other areas. He didn't really have to guard work so much. But many people, and I'd even say most of us, find that the areas of incursion are constantly shifting. If you're someone who aims to live a full life, there's always going to be tension in these priority areas. They're always going to compete for your time and attention. It's going to be a constant balancing act as life circumstances change. All right. So here's what I want you to take a few minutes to do on your own. I just want you to put those 7 areas, rank them in order from most to least importance to you. And then I just want you to identify which area is the highest of those 7, where you're failing, where incursions from people, circumstances, or competing priority area are creating problems. All right. So I want you to take a moment and do that. And then I'm going to have you work in your groups. again, for about 15 minutes. And this is what I'm going to ask you to consider and talk about in your groups. You know, the goal here is for you to use each other to set some better boundaries. So I want, basically, maybe one or two people at each table, someone who chooses to be vulnerable on this issue, may offer up a boundary challenge that they're experiencing and talk that through to the group. And you're kind of inviting your group members to generate some practical boundary recommendations to help you protect something of high importance from yourself or from some outside incursions. All right? And, you know, when we're done, I may ask a couple people to give some examples after this. But so here's what I want you to do in your group. So first of all, do that individual exercise, putting things in order of priority and identifying the one where you're failing. And then as a group, I want you to talk through what's outside that may create problems if it gets in for me. And I want to talk briefly about this idea of multiple wins and then the simply no. There are some things that we can win in more than one area at once. And so, for example, if my personal fitness is important to me, but I also want to grow as a leader, one thing I can do is listen to podcasts while I'm on a treadmill, all right? And that hits two areas at once, all right? There may be some things that if you want to build relationship with a colleague, but also have some leisure time, I don't know, maybe you go skeet shooting with some people at work or golfing or something like that. There are ways you can win in multiple areas at once. There are limits to how much you can do that, but that can sometimes enable you to hit a couple of these important priorities at the same time. And for any of us, there are just going to simply be some things we just have to say no to. And I get it. There may be someone who's really hurting and could use your time, but from time to time, you just have to say no. Again, there were times when Jesus withdrew to talk to God rather than meet a need of a person who was right in front of him. So consider what you simply have to say no to. You may have to deal with the question of, so if I say no, how's it going to get done? And sometimes that'll lead you, maybe I can invest in developing another person to be able to pull this off. But sometimes the answer might be, it just won't get done. All right. So what I want to do, I'll give you about 15 minutes in the groups. And this is sort of the last thing we'll do before Q&A, but I want you at your tables. As I said, just kind of share with your group, which area was your area that the others tend to intrude on. And then maybe a little bit about how that creates problems for you. And then I'd like you to pick one or two people that you just kind of push into this a little bit. So someone at your table saying, hey, I'd like your input group on helping me to find some ways to set better, healthier boundaries on this issue. Okay? Make sense? All right. All right, so I just wanted to offer, we've got 10 more minutes left. Wanted to offer some Q&A time if anyone has questions. So let's go ahead and do that for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll make sure that you get a chance to eat right on time. So any questions really about any aspect, whether it's on the derailer side or on the boundary side, that anyone has? Yeah.
Question on the derailment side. Question on the derailment side. When you are asking those questions for feedback, do you ask that of everybody that you're responsible for, or just a select few, or just those prophetic voices, or who all do you ask that from?
You make some choices there. So I do that regularly with people who report directly to me, all right? But there are other people I might ask as well who experience me in the workplace that I might value their opinions. But I do it pretty broadly, and I want to hear from people, I might even target some people I know I have some rough spots with, okay? I'm really not looking just for affirmation of, that I'm some awesome leader or something. I really I want people to be heard. I want them to know that I care about what they think. I want them to know that, relationships are a two-way street, and I'm willing to hear them out and work on stuff and be better in my relationship with them. How do I value mentorship more?
How do you identify if God is bringing new mentorship, new leaders into your life, new circles? The older you get, the more you're leading in different things. What are you looking for in a mentor for you where you're at?
Yeah, so first of all, people tend to do better with mentors when they start younger in life than when older people on average are not as good at making use of mentors as people who are younger. Earlier in my career, a lot of what I selected mentors around were people who were sort of steps ahead of me in my career, and people that I could trust to really, to not paint too rosy a picture for me. As I have gotten older, in a way, I don't necessarily call them mentors in the same way, but there are certain people I will seek counsel from in different areas. So if I know someone who's really perceptive about some area, I'm going to ask them about it. If I know someone who's good with finances and I have questions or concerns, I'm going to seek out that person. So I have a number of people in my life who I would say I'm going to invite them to speak in that area. But there is an element where it's not really mentoring, but I just think part of being a good colleague is always looking for ways with the people you interact with, that you work with, they can teach me things. They can always be teaching me things, and respecting that I need to ask people, and I'm always going to be learning, and their feedback's valuable, so I need to keep seeking that kind of input. So. Other questions? Yeah.
I think a question that's been in a lot of pastors' minds in recent years has been, what do you think it is that creates this kind of domino effect or avalanche effect in some of these high-powered leaders where, there's a first step that's taken towards moral failure. But then I think the question that many of us wonder is, especially speaking as a young pastor, what is it that accumulates the inability for those high-powered leaders to seek help early in those in what becomes an avalanche at the end of their life? Does that make sense? Or do you see a tie between power and that lust?
I do see power as a key element in there, and as we grow in stature, we start believing more. We get too confident. We start believing too much about ourselves being special. When people rack up successes, they expect themselves to succeed. I say in the book, when everything you touch turns to gold, you start touching things you shouldn't. And so I think a lot of times, my wife told me that's the most quotable thing I've ever said. so I'm glad you asked that question. Give me a chance to get that out there. but there is, we accrue this feeling of success. So we start thinking that we're going to succeed in all things, and we start risking things that we shouldn't risk. And when we're not called out or we don't experience consequences on it, we'll risk a little more. So I think that's a big part of it. So. Any other questions? Probably have time for one or two more. Yeah.
This may be a little tangential, but do you have any guidance on, you're talking about you're over busy, maybe micromanaging. When can you, and when, what should you look for when you're lowering basically your bar, maybe for somebody else to do a task that you do. When is it safe to do so? When is somebody up to that task, and when are they not up to that task? Do you have any?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna pretend I can give you a precise answer on this that works for every situation. But you're probably gonna have to give them the task before they can do it as well as you can. When you look at, I want to talk about just this concept of what motivates people, because I think there's an answer in here. If you look at the literature on what motivates people to do a great job, the literature talks about these concepts of horizontal job loading and vertical job loading. Horizontal job loading is giving someone a lot of work that's the same level of work, okay? Vertical job loading is giving people a new challenge, all right? Something that's a step higher than what you've trusted them with before. And you will find that by and large, people step up when you give them a challenge and you show that you believe in them. And even when I talk about motivation, I'm not talking about getting people to do what you want them to do. I'm talking about getting people to get that fire churning in their own belly that they want to do a great job, okay? You can get people to do what you want them to do by simple carrot and stick stuff, all right? But if you want people to be motivated to do better work, the best thing is to give them an important challenge. I'll give you an example of how we did this at LCBC. So you know how it is a lot of times in any organization, you get some people who are you go to them for every major project, and it's like, well, let's put this person on it. So we were kind of caught in that rut a little bit. And this might sound like a relatively unimportant thing, but it was a big deal. We put in place this, it was really a 4-series classes on moving from orientation to the church up through partnership, okay? So there's 4 levels of stuff. And this was the kind of thing that whoever was leading these was going to get a lot of public exposure, and it was really important that they do it well. And so when we first started talking about who are we going to have do this, we're like, well, which pastor is going to do this? And then we stepped back and we said, they're all kind of overloaded. So maybe we could have a pastor there, but let's pick someone else to lead it. So we looked back and we said, who are our up-and-comers? Who are our rising stars in the organization? And let's ask them to lead it, and the pastor kind of taking a second role. So I got to actually talk with these people, and what I said to them was something along these lines. I've said, look, this is a pretty important thing. It's pretty high profile with the church. And we were first looking at a pastor to do this, and we thought we have an opportunity to get some other people engaged in this. And you are a rising star in the organization. We're seeing you have some real gifts and talents, and we believe that we can trust you to do this and do it well. Now, I have to caution you, we're not taking anything off of your plate. This is an add-on. It's not a huge add-on, but it will be more. I can't take anything off your plate. Is this something you're willing to do? Okay. I mean, I can tell you each one of those 4 people was like, yes, I can't believe you're trusting me to do this. And they stepped up and they did it. And that's an example of a vertical job load. We had enough safety because we had a pastor paired with them, but they're leading out the ideas. They're doing the presentation. They're getting some feedback. But that would be an example of where we're really kind of doing the dual thing of trying to get other people engaged in this, but also getting them excited about doing it. So, good question.